Welcome to this Photoshop tutorial, creating a night scene in Photoshop. My name is Peter Pohle, and what we will do in this tutorial is we will create this night scene from this photograph. This photograph was taken on an overcast day, which lends itself better to turn into a night scene because it doesn't have any strong light and shadows. If you go to the internet, you will see that there are many examples of night scenes that are created for matte painting, for special effects, or concept design for a game or so. We will use this photograph as a starting point. Open the JPEG image original.jpg and click on the background layer and click and drag it over the layer icon. And rename the new layer Night. We will turn this layer into our night, but in order to do that we need to add some adjustment layers. So go down to the bottom and click on this icon here that's a circle with the black and white. Let's choose the hue and saturation layer. We won't need the mask, so make a right mouse button click and choose Delayed Layer Mask. Click on the icon here for hue and saturation, and we do not need to change the hue or the saturation, but we will change the lightness to approximately -80. Now this is not quite there yet, it's a little bit gray, so we're also going to add a photo adjustment layer. So click on that adjustment layer icon again, choose photo filter, and at the top here under the presets choose the cooling filter 80. We will also increase the density of our photo filter to approximately 44%. At this point the two adjustment layers will also influence all the layers below. So if we turn off the night, it will also change the appearance of the background layer. But we can limit the influence of the adjustment layers to only the night layer, and in order to do that, hold down the Alt key or Option key and click between the night and the hue and saturation layer, and do the same holding down the Alt key between the photo filter. So if you turn off the night scene now, you see that it is not influencing our background layer. For simplicity, I would so suggest Shift select all of these layers and put these in a folder. I'm going to call my folder Night. I'm going to leave this open right now so that you don't get confused. The other thing that I often do is I color code my layers. So if you go over the night layer and you do a right mouse button click over the eyeball, let's choose blue as our color code for our night layers. We don't need the layer mask for our photo filters, so we're also going to delete that layer mask. But we will add a layer mask to our night folder, which is going to influence all of the night hue and saturation and photo filter. Go to the bottom and click on this icon here, that's the square white icon with the dark dot in it, and that will add a mask layer to our folder of our night scene here. Select the layer mask of our night folder, go over and select the brush and click into the scene a few times. So this is what a light is going to look like in our night scene, but you may recognize that this light needs to be warmer because incandescent lighting is pretty warm. So select the background layer, which is going to reveal our lights in our scene, and we are going to add a photo adjustment filter. We're going to leave the 85 warming filter and crank up the density to approximately 75. So if you look at the scene now, this gives you a pretty good impression what an incandescent lighting would look like in our night scene. So most of our work on this scene is going to be done here in this layer mask. And let's clear this so that we get back to our complete night scene. So we need to change our foreground layer to white. You can click this icon here. Let me explain that when you paint with black on the layer mask, The black will basically block out anything that's in this layer here and reveal what is underneath. And this is what we are going to do. So switch back to white, have the layer mask selected, and press Shift Delete and choose the foreground color as the filling color and press OK. And from here on we are doing the majority of our work in this layer mask. We're going to put a light above the door in this area of our scene, and we need to create a mask that will basically outline the area that the light might hit. The scene is a little bit dark to see, so I'm temporarily going to lighten our night layer to 95%. Then select the polygon lasso tool. I prefer using the polygon lasso tool over the regular lasso tool. Zoom into your scene, move it up so that you can access the bottom area. The light is going to be behind that electric pole here, so we have to block out the pole, and there's some other areas that we want to block out also. So with the polygon lasso tool, begin clicking in this area here because that's the side of the wall, and I'm going to click from here. Just follow the directions on the screen. There's a little down pipe. I'm going around this area, and I think that probably the light will go approximately in that direction. And then we're going to go over here. The light will also hit this part a tiny bit. Over here, and probably the front side of that post. It might even get a little bit light up here in this area. So we're going to include that electric post here, go down to here, include the car, and then it's also going to hit part of these building elements on this side, and I'm basically just blocking out the horizontal planes that are not facing toward the light. So I'm going to here, and I'm just going to cut over here and go to approximately here. There's a box here, we want to include that. And then I would say to, let's go up here, there's a metal ladder back there, and then from this position of the light it might even shine in that direction. We probably won't get any light there, but I'm just including that in case we want to have a little bit of light in that direction. Coming down here, going back here, and then there's also, if you can see, there's other metal box where this face is facing away from the light, so we need to also cover that up. So I'm going to include that into the post, and the light is probably casting a shadow from up here over the edge of the metal box here. Going back to the post, and then finish our mask. If you press the Q key, you kind of get an idea or preview of the areas that's gonna be affected from our light. So going out of the quick mask and press Ctrl H to hide the selection. Select the brush, make sure that your brush hardness is set to 0. Also make sure that we're going to select our layer mask, and we're going to start by putting a light here and centering it right to where we think our light is going to be. But we want to do this slowly with several steps, so I'm going to lower the opacity of our brush to approximately 15% and begin by clicking. We also need to make sure that we have black because we're going to be painting in black on our layer mask. And we begin clicking several times, enlarging our brush. And we may not want more light in this area here, but we want more light in this area. So I'm going to move the brush down here and begin lighting these areas up. Reduce my brush a little bit. Maybe we're going to hit a little bit at the top here. And then with the smaller brush, make sure that I hit those areas here where the light is definitely going to be. Maybe even light up the point of where the light is going to be. So that's looking pretty good. We have a few areas here that need some adjustment, and we can do that by painting with our brush in white and basically erasing part of those areas here. So looking at the scene right now, I feel like it's still not enough light. I'm going to temporarily bring the opacity of our night folder or group layer back to 100. And I'm going to select the mask, but I will apply a curve adjustment to it. So I'm with the mask selected, going to image, adjustment, curves, and I'm clicking and dragging that curve a little bit down. We only want one point here, so I think this gives us a little bit more intensity. So I'm just going to leave it at that, apply that, and from now on we're going to keep going by cleaning up. And we also need to add light in this area, because the light source from here will also add a little bit light to this wall and possibly a little bit to the surface of the walkway here. Selecting the lasso tool, I will only block out this front of this building here, because I think this is receiving a little bit more light from this light source than this wall back here in this walkway. So selecting the lasso tool. Now from here, I'm going to think that the light will cast a shadow approximately in that direction, and also going down this small wall. We're going to do another Control H to hide our selection, select our brush, enlarge it, and make sure that our opacity is set very low. I'm going down to 10. I'm going to be a little bit careful in this area. And I think I'm going to leave it like this. Going back to the lasso tool, Control D to deselect. And now we're going to do this wall here and possibly a little bit of this wall up here in this area. Working around this railing. Closing that off, Control H to hide. Select our brush, and we're only going to do a tiny bit. We don't want much light in that area. And also separate this light of this facade from this light area here. So Control D to deselect, selecting the lasso tool again, and now we are going to do this walkway. And I am including this railing. I feel like that it is also going to receive a little bit lighting. But on one side of the railing that doesn't receive any light. And we're going to be very careful with this area here, because I feel that it shouldn't get that much lighting. Control H to hide. Select our brush again. I'm going to add a little bit light here. Not much. I think that's probably enough. That looks good. We still need to add this part of the facade that needs to be lit. And looking at the scene, it appears that this door is a little bit on this side of the little alleyway than this roof is. You really need to study the areas to find out where it will receive some light. So I'm selecting the lasso tool. From here the angle would approximately go this way, maybe a little bit up. And we won't get light really at the top there, but I'm including it in case I feel like it needs to get a little bit of it. Control H to hide. Our brush again, enlarge it approximately this diameter. Make sure we have our opacity pretty low. I think that's probably enough. There are a few adjustments that we need to make. We need to soften some of the shadows, like this one here that gets a little bit softer at the end. Retouching this area, softening some of these shadows, and especially probably lighten this part or softening the edges of this post, maybe even blurring it a little bit. And especially this post is casting a shadow in that direction from the light source, approximately this direction, so we need to put that in. Let's put the cast shadow in that the electric pole is casting on the ground. So we're going to take our lasso tool, I'm going to zoom in, and going from here I would think that the casting would be approximately like this. So I'm going to click here, get a little bit wider here, not too much, back to here, and I'm going to fill this with white. Let's deselect. And you will notice that this shadow is very, very sharp, so we need to soften that somewhat. So I will go back to the lasso tool. I am increasing the feather to 60, and I'm drawing a wider selection around this shadow. Now we will apply a blur filter to that. Go to Filter, Blur, and choose Gaussian Blur. And we don't need a whole lot, so I'm going to set mine to approximately 10 or so. Deselect. We're going to do a similar thing to this shadow. We're going to make sure we have our lasso tool and click an area and go further apart the further away that cast shadow is from the light source, and apply a blur to that also. Deselect, and you can see that this blur effect works pretty nice. So I'm going to go over to this area. Here we need to do something similar to that too, because that shadow also would get a little bit more blurred toward the end. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. That works. Deselect, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Deselect. The last adjustments we're just going to paint in, so we're going to use a brush. I want to soften this area here, so I'm going to set the brush a little bit larger, use white, and I'm going to click a few times of paint very carefully in this area in order to soften this hot edge. So I'm going to switch to black, so I'm going to press the X key to have black as my foreground color. Reduce my brush size. I want to have a little bit of a light lip here at the end, so I'm going to, and you don't even have to use your brush, you can do it with your mouse. So if you click here and hold down the Shift key and click at the other end, it will draw a straight line, and you can repeat that going back and lighten that up. And there's a few things where we need to then add some cast shadows here, but let's look at this area. I think that that post needs to be a little bit having a soft edge, so I'm going to click at this end, click at this end, maybe go back down and hold down the Shift key in the meantime to create that soft edge, and maybe a tiny bit on this side also. I just don't like quite that very hard edge there. And you can even apply the same things to this hard edge if you feel like that this is too strong. Switching back to white, pressing the X key and making the shadow a little bit harder. We can also then paint some cast shadows in this area, but we need to then make sure that we increase our brush size. Maybe that was a little bit too much, so I'm going to step back and set the opacity to 50 or 30%, 50%. There's, for instance, if the light is here, it's going to cast a little bit of a shadow here in this top of the door, and I need to make the hardness a little bit higher. Reduce my brush size, hold down, press one time, hold down the shift key, and while I'm holding down the shift key, I'm just going to click around and it will then extend a straight line to that area. We also need to do that to this door here, because that's not going to receive light. And I'm only clicking and holding down the shift key, and then I can go back and forth and fill that area in. So we can basically even paint with our brush here. So I'm going to zoom out, and obviously in order to achieve this result, it requires a lot more painting into other areas that you see here in the background, on the side, in the street, and so on. If you select your mask and you switch to channels, you kind of get an idea of the painting that we have created. But to show you what the mask looks like for this scene, I copied and pasted into this document so you get an idea what this actually looks like. So this is the completed mask for all the light sources. To create the rest of the lighting in the scene, use a similar method like we did here, in using the lasso tool and the brush to paint out the light areas. But pay attention to areas where there would be shadows inside a door, for instance, or the stairway that would cast a shadow. Here it gets a little bit more complicated because we also have the stairwell that we have to look through. But you can use the same method, there's no difference. I won't take the time to show you because I think that what I showed you here is enough for you to understand what methodology is to create the scene. There's a few more things to wrap this up, and we will get to that in the next. Before we will add the final touches of our lights, we also need to lighten the sky up a little bit. If you look at the scene here, I like this light in the back here because that indicates that there's some city lights in the background. Now you're going to ask, how is it going to be possible to do all of this masking out and make sure that the light is only behind the trees? And I will show you a little trick here. And the trick is that we will be working just with channels, and we basically just click through the channels to find the one that serves best our purpose. In this case, it's best to turn off all of the other layers that we have, so that we're going to go back to our original layer. Click on channels and click through the layer, the blue, the green, and the red. And I'm looking for the best separation from trees to background. And I think that either the blue or the green, I think the blue works a little bit better. So I'm going to click and drag the blue channel down to the duplicate layer icon. So we have a blue copy, and we will apply a curve adjustment to that and make the curve really steep until we get some black here. But we want to be careful not getting too much, blocking out the areas that we have between the trees. Before we, I'm going to use the lasso tool to select the bottom areas and fill it with black, but we need to make sure that we set our feathering back to 0. Polygon lasso tool, now I'm going to click through the scene here. I also want to get the electric ports to work, to include it into this. There's an area here that we need to exclude from the selection, so I'm holding down the Alt key and you see that my cursor has a minus, and I'm going to click through this area to take that selection or add that selection into our scene here. And we need to add these electric boxes, so I'm pressing the Shift key to add to the selection. They're kind of hard to see. And here's the second one that we need to add. So this is our selection. Then make sure that you have black as a foreground color, press Shift Backspace or Shift Delete. And fill this with black, deselect, and this is going to be our mask that we're going to use in order to bring our sky in. Make sure that you name it Night Sky. In the Channels panel, click on the RGB channel to make it visible again and turn off the night sky. Switch to Layer, and under the Select menu, go down to Load Selection and find in the Channels drop-down box the night sky. Click OK, and you should see the marching ants now. And we will add a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and we make sure that we're going to move it all the way to the top. And clicking on the hue and saturation icon, we get the properties that we can adjust. So what we want to do is we want to slightly lighten it, not a whole lot. The hue slider, we're going to move toward the left, and we're going to decrease the saturation somewhere around maybe 50. Then we are going to the gradient tool, click on the top and pick the black to transparency gradient tool. Click on the mask and click and drag in here in order to block out some of the light. I like the light a little bit over on the left side, but I also feel like that the sky and everything could be a little bit darker, so I'm going down to my hue and saturation adjustment layer that may create the night sky, and I turn down the lightness a tiny bit. As the last step, we add the light source into our scene, but before we do that, we need to create a merged copy of our whole scene. So first of all, select one of the layers, can be the top layer, then do a Control or Command A to have the marching ants around the whole scene, and then do a Control or Command Shift C and Command V, which creates a merged layer at the top of our scene. Open the Filter drop-down menu, choose Render and Lens Flare. We're going to leave the first lens flare. We're going to set the brightness to the lowest point, which is 10%, and then you need to move the light source right above the door. So that would work. And we're going to set the layer to color dodge, but reduce the opacity of the layer to maybe 60% or so. So we are pretty much finished with the scene, except that all the other lights are not done. That's your assignment. You have to create some more lights into your scene. I'm going to show you my example that I created before, so you have a comparison of what I did here with the scene and what the tutorial did.